Ready to go, Carl?
Here we go. Thank you everyone for coming. We really appreciate it. Good to get one in just before the holidays, and then you can be rid of work and school, and you don't have to think about us for at least another week. And also thank you, Hanley, for coming. This is the last time we're going to see Hanley for the rest of the year, unfortunately. So we're going to miss her, but take it away, Hanley.
Thank you very much, Kyle. Well, welcome to Dyslexia Month, everybody. We're just at the beginning of it, and it's probably a whole jam-packed month full of dyslexic campaigns that's going to be running all over. But I'm glad that I can kick it off with this one, Rethinking Dyslexia. Today we're going to look a little bit about specifically dyslexia, perspectives through time. We're going to look at a recent study, the Delphi study, that has been working for the last 3 years to define dyslexia. We're going to look at what they found. We're going to look at their perspectives on interventions. We're going to do a bit of reflection on their study in terms of what is great or what would have been greater. And then we're going to consider a multifactorial intervention, and I'll tell you what that is when we get to it. Okay, so starting off, the dyslexia through time. The dyslexia, I think everybody kind of knows by now, it's a Greek word. It comes from the German ophthalmologist Rudolf Berden, who first used it in the place of word blindness, which was the word that was used for dyslexic learners back in the day. And basically it means just dyslexia, which means difficult with words, and in simply it's difficult with word recognition, reading and spelling. And honestly, that's in 1887, and in essence, nothing has changed yet. Dyslexia is still seen as a difficulty with word recognition and reading and spelling in certain populations. Now, but the perspectives around dyslexia have changed quite significantly. Now, the early 19th century, early 20th century, word blindness existed, which means that they thought it was an inexplicable problem and they thought it was something to do with the eyes. Now, we all know that the eyes do still play a role even today in many of those learners, but at that time, they thought that was it. And then in the mid-20th century, it shifted to a more language-based disorder, where they understood that the difficulties were not visual, but it was more to do with your phonological skills. The problem with identifying and manipulating speech sounds. So you'll see the word disorder coming in. It means it's fixed, cannot be changed. It is lifelong. Then in the late 20th century, so the 1990s to 2000s, neuroplasticity came in, and people were doing a lot more research around the brain. We talked about neuroplasticity in our previous series. And the IDA, the International Dyslexia Association, describes dyslexia as a neurobiological learning disability, which means a process that involves the function and the interaction of your nerve cells or your neurons. So basically your brain function that affects information processing, memory, etc. And in this case, affecting the phonological area of the brain. And it's characterized by difficulties in word recognition, spelling and decoding. And this kind of phonological core view that started in the mid-20th century is kind of fixed by now. It was dominant. Everybody believes that dyslexia is very much to do with your phonological processing. Okay. Then in the recent years, 2010s, 2020s, a lot of things happened. Genetics and neuroimaging confirmed that there is a neurobiological basis, but rather than causing dyslexia, it is more a correlation. So in other words, people that struggle to read happen to have certain areas in the brain that's working differently. We've done that in our research, and I'm going to refer back to that session later on as well. In our first session of our series, Think Smarter, we talked about the research that found that it is more a correlation than a causal effect between reading and brain differences. And they found that phonology alone does not really describe dyslexia in full. It's just too narrow. That there's a lot of cognitive things going on there. The processing speed, working memory, orthographic learning, or the storing of word forms, and also rapid naming, your ability to quickly name words and sounds. And so dyslexia was now seen as a multifactorial or multidimensional condition and no longer a single deficit, which is phonology. And also it's more now a continuum. So in other words, there's lesser forms and greater forms. I think we've been doing that over the last few years already. It's not, you either have dyslexia or you don't. And then cross-linguistic studies also showed that if you're speaking, for example, Italian, it's going to appear different from when you speak English, and even Afrikaans and English, you'll find that there's differences between how the children show their difficulties. And then there's an increasing focus on, together with that correlational rather than causative view, that there's a brain difference. So the neurodiverse view coming in, it's not a disorder, it's a difference. It's a difference. But again, a difference that is lasting, and there's this recognition of the strength of dyslexia as well. Now, despite all this research and despite us knowing so much more about dyslexia, it's still problematic to find a single definition. And I'm going to just as an example, so the International Dyslexia Association, the two main ones, the British Dyslexia Association and the American Dyslexia Association, they all have very different definitions and views of dyslexia. So across the world, different practitioners will have different views. And we also compare this with this kind of element parable. It's an old Indian parable of 6 blind men and an elephant. Now, if you take 6 blind men to an elephant and you put their hands on a part of the elephant, they're going to get very different experiences. One might think that get the ear and think it's a fan. Another one might get the tusk and think it's a spear, or the tail and think it's a rope. And they would all be right in terms of that element of what they're studying. And with dyslexia, it's been very much the same. The studies and the research has also always had a very narrow focus. So they would focus on a very specific area of dyslexia and then make generalizations from it. But that might or might not concur with someone else who's doing a study on something very different, but also still dyslexia. So what they've done is they've made a study, the Delphi study, and they use the Delphi method, and that's where the name comes from, which basically means that you make a forecasting process. You get some statements, and then you get a lot of people, experts, a range of experts, to look at the statements you've made and to see whether they agree or not. And if a lot of them disagree, then you're going to go back to your statements and see if you can refine them, and then you're going to send it out again and ask them, do you now agree? And that way they try to get consensus. So this study was finalized in February 2025 in the Journal of Child Psychology and Psychiatry, and it was aimed therefore at shaping our current thinking and getting some measure of consensus around the key elements around dyslexia. And this is the first in the history. Dyslexia has always had this dyslexia debate, everybody disagreeing with each other. So this kind of brought together various views and see if we can find something that we can all agree on. It was conducted by the University of Birmingham, the Speech and Language Department Assessment Standards Committee, SASC, King's College, at King's College London, and then also University of Oxford. So you can see a lot of important people involved in this, and they did a 3-year research and kind of engagement and consultation with the panel of experts, which was 58 international experts, included a wide range. So not only researchers, but also looking at academics, specialist teachers, educational psychologists, and even individuals with dyslexia, so your people with experience. So that's kind of opened up a few doors. It's much more wider in terms of context than just the people researching. The report consists of 42 statements about dyslexia, and then they only kept the statements or incorporated the statements and had an 80% plus consensus among the different participants. And it covered the definition of dyslexia, the intellectual abilities of dyslexics, the etiology, co-occurrence with other disorders, the changing impact of dyslexia over time, and also some common misconceptions. Now let's look at the definition that they came up with, and it's quite a hectic one, so bear with me. So what they're basically saying is that dyslexia is a set of processing difficulties. Now you can see we've had disorder, we've had disability, we've had difference, and now we're having processing difficulties. That's a far move away from what it was before, and it's very much welcome. Because what we're now saying is that dyslexia does not cause reading difficulties. Dyslexia consists of a set of difficulties that affect reading. So it's total opposite thinking than it was before. We will look also later on again about some of the changes. And in dyslexia, some or all aspects of literacy attainment are weak, which in relation to expectations in terms of teaching, age, and other attainment. So instead of intellectual, it's in terms of your teaching instructions, attainment, etc. And then that acknowledgement that languages differ, that is on a continuum. And the interesting thing, there's also a study by Protopopos and Perilla that says that not only is there a continuum of dyslexia in terms of less severe and more severe, but actually dyslexia or this dyslexia continuum is just part of a greater continuum of the whole population. And they would just be the lower tail of reading of the normal spectrum and not a total separate spectrum, which is also an interesting study. And then that the nature and the developmental trajectory of dyslexia depends on genetic as well as environmental influences. And I think that shows that not everybody has the same severity, but also not everybody has the same path. Some dyslexics do very well and others really struggle, and that does not only depend on their genetics, it also depends on environmental factors. Then they said that dyslexia can affect other skills as well, such as mathematics, reading comprehension, learning another language. And then the most observed is still phonology, so still the phonological awareness, processing speed, and memory. But it does now acknowledge that it's not sufficient to explain the variability that's observed. So we're moving away, and like I said, from causality rather than correlation. And they're bringing in these cognitive skills, working memory, processing speed, orthographic skills that contribute to the impact of dyslexia and basically are there for the root causes. Really good to see that coming in. And then dyslexia frequently co-occurs with others, so it's a comorbidity. I think we're all aware, but it's good to have it stated that dyscalculia, ADHD, etc. often co-occurs with dyslexia. Now let's look at some of the skills, the cognitive skills. And I think this is the real change for me. I think a lot of the other things that's happened is really mainstream thinking already, but this is new. The fact that they're making it a set of processing difficulties, acknowledging that at the heart, it's a cognitive issue rather than just a reading issue. So let's have a look at the skills that they have mentioned. So first, phonological processing consists of phonological awareness. It's the ability to recognize and manipulate sounds. So for example, to say that cat, fat, sat all have the same act, and by changing just the first letter, we change the word. Phonological processing speed. It's a speed at which you can pull your sound knowledge from your long-term memory. So you can see that even long-term memory comes in there. Your phonological memory, that's your short-term ability. So even your short-term memory comes in here to store and manipulate sound-based information in the brain. In other words, can you understand, like we said, that cat, sat, fat, you can manipulate it. So you need to store the information in order to be able to manipulate it. Part of your working memory as well. So then in the working memory, the attention, your sequencing skills comes in, your short and long-term memory, processing speed, your auditory and visual perception are important for working memory, as well as your executive functions and metacognition. So a wide range of cognitive skills that underlie working memory. And then the processing speed, of course, the speed at which your brain is able to process information, another cognitive skill. And then also graphic skills. And if you look at all the skills that underlie orthographic skills, you've got your visual-based skills, which is your processing, your memory, as well as your sequencing. Because if you're going to put words together, you need to recognize the form of the word. It's language-based skills as well, so your phonological processing, your rapid naming. Rapid naming, your ability to very quickly recognize or automatically recognize words and sounds. And then your general cognitive skills, like your working memory again, your processing speed again, and then attention. So if you look at all the skills that have been put together, sorry, let's look at this before we get to that. So let's look at the Delphi study. So we've now said that they've recognized all these cognitive skills. They've recognized that it's on a continuum and it's more correlation than causative. Now let's look at what they've said about interventions for dyslexia. But first of all, this is also a bit of a change, that remediation is possible and possible that it can be effective. And that's also changed from the past. In the past, it's very much believed that it's kind of unchangeable. So the experts agree that dyslexia can be remediated with appropriate intervention. And then they stress early systematic and evidence-based instruction, and then, but particularly then focusing on phonological awareness and phonics. So going back to the literacy element, they say it's not a cure, but you can significantly improve. So again, they say that it does persist. It is a difficulty that's neurodevelopmental, but its impact can be reduced through remediation. And then they say that some learners can achieve functional literacy. Okay, even though maybe some elements remain, they can achieve functional literacy. And then therefore they say that intervention should be intensive and tailored. It cannot just be more of the classroom. So these extra classes that just do more of the same wouldn't help. It has to be a customized, evidence-based, structured and cumulative and individualized instruction. Okay, that doesn't necessarily mean one-on-one, but it means tailored. Then accommodations are still important to support while remediation takes place. So there's acknowledgement that some learners might not need it forever. And then they say that especially for older learners, that might still be very relevant. Okay. Now let's just reflect a little bit on what they found. And first of all, let's look at some of the positive changes. I've already mentioned some of it, but let's just kind of summarize it. So we said that they go from a single deficit phonological to acknowledge that it's multifactorial, that is multiple cognitive domains that's impacting on children's difficulties. We said that it moves from a category, you have it or you don't, to kind of more continuum of severity. There's no strict cutoffs. That it went from just dyslexia on its own to being considered as co-occurring with very often other conditions as well. Then we talked about one change was from diagnosis first. So let's say I think this child might have dyslexia, so let's get them diagnosed. Their focus have changed to let's intervene first. So they struggle with reading, let's help the child, regardless of whether they have a diagnosis or not. I think that's a really good change, because the earlier you help children, the better. So yes, you can still get the child tested down the line, but that's not necessarily your first step. Your first step is help. Then it went from this kind of narrow, more genetic neurobiological condition to acknowledging that also the environment and instruction and contextual factors, it all plays a part. It's a much more complex condition than we thought. It went from deficit only, so dyslexia can compensate but never fully overcome. They have now acknowledged that it is possible for dyslexic learners to really be remediated to a high effect, and that they might even get a near typical functioning. So basically we call it a functional cure. You cannot cure dyslexia, but it's a functional cure. You can really overcome the symptoms and they can continue as normal children, being able to read as normal learners. Okay, but a lot of factors will play in on that. And then they went from a lifelong disorder, which is to kind of more a skills deficit. But what stays the same is that they still view it as lifelong. They still acknowledge that some learners can overcome it. So there's a positivity about that. So positive, but we would like to see that there's some acknowledgement that some learners can really overcome it as well. But we're happy with that. Single deficit phonological, there's only phonological skills, just saying that, and that's not changed. And it's a shame, because they've acknowledged the factorial, but they're still saying that intervention should focus solely on phonology and reading or academic skills. It does not consider the cognitive skills that they've identified as being multifactorial. In other words, if you only look at the one element, we'll talk about that in a minute as well. How can you address all the skills? But dyslexic learners will always struggle. The dyslexia is not fixed. It can be overcome. So, but it is still ongoing. So in other words, the statement is kind of, it's great that they acknowledge that it's multifactorial. But why is it ignored in remediation? It's almost like having your car broken and you go to a mechanic and you say to them, can you please fix my car? And they say, well, we can fix this part of the car, but the rest of the car, unfortunately, we cannot fix. So you're going to have to drive with it just as it is. And you're kind of thinking, well, I might as well get a new car. Why would I have just that little bit fixed? So that's maybe for the future. We're hoping that they're going to think about that. So the question is, if they did focus on all those other factors as well, would we find that there's some learners that can overcome it, might become most of all learners can overcome the symptoms of dyslexia and become functional readers? So that's just a question in the air. So let's look at if we went into that future. We're hoping, I mean, at Edublox, we've been advocating for this multifactorial view of dyslexia for the last 45 years. So we're glad that finally the researchers have caught up with that, and the communities have caught up with that and are now acknowledging that. So we're hoping that the next step will be that they'll also start looking at why would we only remediate one part of the problem when we can remediate the whole problem, and hopefully that they will come to the table over the next few years. Very positive steps done already. So let's look at what a multifactorial intervention might look like. So if you look at the traditional approach, so here's your table or your pyramid, they would look at the bottom layer, their language. So that's your kind of more expressive and receptive language. It's your phonological processing, which we talked about, your ability to manipulate sounds in spoken language, and it's your vocabulary. So do you have a wide knowledge of words? And then then they go straight to the upper level, which is reading. And then skip everything in between and go to phonemic awareness. So that's your ability to recognize sounds and letters and sounds and combinations of sounds. Your sight words, which is your ability to immediately recognize words as you read them. And then semantics, so your vocabulary knowledge, you understand the meaning of words, and that also goes into your reading comprehension. So those are the skills that they're feeling that the traditional approach was all about, and that their new approach is still all about, unfortunately. And this is what it would look like if you consider the skills that underlie reading and learning, all the skills we looked at in the previous slide. If you looked at your attention, so attention, of course, is looked at separately in ADHD. We also looked at your visual and your auditory processing, and you also looked at all your different memories. You looked also at your ability to reason, the ability to manipulate information, and you developed all of those underlying learning skills together with your reading and your spelling and your sight words and your vocabulary. How much more powerful would that be if we looked at everything together? Okay, so the case for cognitive development, which I've just stated, has been made in our series that we just finished. So the Think Smart series, and the whole first session, Is Dyslexia a Lifelong Sentence, was all focused on the case for cognitive development and all the research that underlies it, and all the evidence that it does improve academic outcomes and all these different skills that underlie dyslexia and really can remediate the symptoms of dyslexia. So I'm not going to go into that now. That was part of our previous one. I'm going to keep today short because I know it's almost holiday. But basically, we're today looking at taking all that research as a given, taking what the researchers are saying, that dyslexia is about more than phonology. Phonology is all about cognitive skills that impact on phonology. So if we can look at that multifactorial intervention, surely we can have reading success for more of the learners than just some. Okay. So let's look a little bit about why cognitive development is not high on the priority list for the Delphi study and for researchers overall. Often cognitive development is seen as the black sheep in education. There's quite a few reasons for that. So let's look at some of them. One of them, or quite a few of them, fall under the system limitation. Now, system being the educational system, the policymakers, the teachers at schools. So it's not about whether cognitive development works or not, it's just whether it's implementable in schools. Okay. So first, there's a preference for symptom-based. We do like to know that things are always curriculum relevant, so we can test it with a test and see the differences. So phonics, for example, numeracy catch-up programs, you can do a a test and you can see the progress and you can see how it works. And it works on the immediate problem. So they struggle with maths, it works on maths. They struggle with phonics, it works on phonics. So it's very direct related to this, to what you see. Whereas cognitive development is more vague. Working memory is a vague concept. Attention, processing speed. For most of us, it's a vague concept. So it strengthens the root skills rather than my direct problem that I'm seeing in the classroom. And then because the symptoms are more visible and measurable, like I said, cognition kind of looks less direct, so it's sometimes ignored. Okay. Then funding and policy bias. So you want clear assessments, matrices, and we've made progress in 10% progress, 20% progress, 30% progress. So you want to be able to have those direct progress measures in the system, whereas cognitive development doesn't always perfectly align. You can't always say, well, I've now done this 10 hours of cognitive development and therefore my reading has improved by so much, or my academic marks have improved by so much. It's not always that quantifiable. Then in terms of remediation versus compensation, we like quick fixes. So remediation approaches that build the underlying skills, like cognitive development, it takes time. The brain is not a quick fix. We all know if you want to diet, if you want to exercise, to change your body shape, it's hard work and it takes months and months and months of commitment, regular exercise and a very positive mindset. And then you're going to start seeing results gradually over time. Now, in education, you want the child to be ready the next day. You don't want to have to wait a year or 2 years or sometimes even 3 years to see those results. So it's much easier to go for compensation. So if we can have assistive technology, if we can have accommodation and just kind of do a lot of extras just to kind of try and see if we can fill the gaps as quickly as we can just for this test coming up. So if we can just do the skills for the next test, then we can do the test and then we can breathe again and let's just then cram for the next test. Then it's quick fixes. So that's much preferred than the long journey that will reach long-term results. So the schools therefore often lead towards compensation. So they say that your remediation potential is limited. Compensation gives immediate results, and a child can do well if someone reads for them or writes for them, and all they need to know is to show what they understand instead of what they can do. Okay, so in terms of difficulty in teacher training and implementation, like we talked about, it's a bit of a vague concept. It's difficult to understand. It's not easy. I've tried over the last few months. I hope you stuck with me, and we tried to demystify a lot of those cognitive skills, and we even looked at a lot of strategies of how you can develop them in the classroom, but it's not covered in your teacher training, which means that practitioners don't necessarily think about incorporating cognitive skills into their classroom. So unless someone actually comes and shows them and tells them and explains what it means and gives them strategies, you're not going to do it. You're going to just focus on the academics. And then in terms of time as well, how do I fit it into my class time? How do I fit it into my schedule? It can be very daunting. And in the end, even if you have good intentions, you might end up not doing it. Okay. So that's the system. Now, the other side is, let's look at the research. Now, in this cognitive wave where neuroplasticity became kind of a buzzword, and all these apps and games came out that said, I'm going to develop your memory, develop your logical thinking skills by doing this game. And a lot of these commercial games came on the market. They made all these claims about how it's going to improve all your cognitive skills, but they had no evidence showing that it actually does that. So that kind of gave a disreputation to cognitive skills. It was kind of seen as just playing and not really having any educational value. Okay. And this is a shame because they were programs that are high quality and evidence-based and structured and everything it needs to be, but these kind of apps overrode all of those and tainted all with the same brush. And then in terms of research, there was this kind of motivation to say that it does not work. So what happened is that there were a number of studies that kind of went out to disprove cognitive development and just to brand it as over-promising and under-delivering. And that was based very much on these kind of commercial and fringe programs that were used for one of the studies at least. And that's the Bango Theory study, which was launched by the BBC in England in 2010. And they did a meta-analysis. We will talk about that study in a minute. And then there was a meta-analysis by Kearns and Fuchs in 2013, where they looked at lots of different studies which they considered cognitive programs or brain training, and then they concluded that the results did not support the use of cognitive focused instructions. And so, in other words, as quickly as it developed, the whole idea of cognitive brain training and brain training, it was just dismissed and locked back into the cupboard and said, it doesn't work. Let's not look at it again. And that's a real shame. So what happened is that even your evidence-based approaches got tarred with the same brush, and we went back to what we know, back to what is safe, which is just your literacy intervention and academic remediation. So let's look at the Bango Theory study. They had 11,000 adults aged 18 to 60. Now note, adults, most of the children that struggle with dyslexia and that are going through remediation are children. So doing an adult study is already not really relating to what it's really about. Then they did various online tasks, so your kind of commercial apps, your games. They did it 10 minutes a day, 3 times a week. So you're looking at 30 minutes a week, over 6 weeks. So we're looking at 3 hours in total. Okay, so just keep that in mind. And then the activities was group 1. They were doing reasoning and planning and problem solving. Group 2, they were doing short-term memory, attention, visual spatial skills, and some basic maths, kind of more those gamey things. And group 3 just did some online searches for answers to trivia questions. Okay. And what they found is that actually the participants in group 1 and 2 did improve with the task they practiced. Okay, so even though they just did 3 hours over 6 weeks, they did improve, but they couldn't transfer that to other tasks. And then improvements only lasted for a short period. So what they said is it doesn't work. Okay. So let's just have a look at it. So with 1, very short duration. Okay, lacks intensity. Think about 30 minutes a week. Can change be realistically expected? Unstructured. So the participants could choose their own activities. So they weren't told what to do. They could go from all these different games and they could choose which ones they wanted to play. And one day they could play the one and another day they could play the other one. There was no rules around it. Okay, so think about that as well. If you're doing a study with very much arbitrary activities, can you expect to get a real outcome? Then they were focused only on cognitive skills, which means that they didn't do reading or spelling or comprehension tasks to see if it makes a difference there. If they only did cognitive skills and they did only the single cognitive focus. So either reasoning or memory. They didn't do a range of cognitive skills. And they did online only. So it was all online, all computerized. So my question is, if you did any intervention, whether it be reading, spelling, maths, comprehension, or health focused, you want to get fit or you want to lose weight, and you did it within these perimeters. So 3 times a week for only a very short period of time. Do what you want. So I'm going to do today, I'm going to like jog for 10 minutes, and to maybe 2-3 days later I'm going to push some weights. Or are you going to expect to see real sustainable change within these perimeters in any field? Okay, that's just a question. So let's go and look at the meta-analysis. Oh, what have I done? Oh, sorry guys, here's a problem. I'm going to just quickly remove that. I don't know, oops, undo. Don't know what's happened there. You quickly delete that and see if it makes a difference. Someone has changed my animations for me. Okay, I'm going to just share it quickly again. So what we want to do is we want to go and compare the 2010 study to an evidence-based program. I'm going to use Edublox because unfortunately we're kind of the only one that I know of. So I'm going to compare with Edublox. I just want you to see the difference. So whereas a 2010 study had a short duration, an Edublox lesson would be 90 minutes long. So one lesson, 90 minutes long, and you would do 2 or even sometimes 3 lessons a week. So basically in 1 week, you would do as much learning as you would do in the whole 6 weeks that the study was going on. It's structured, so this has been developed over many years and research to make sure that it works. Whereas here, they could just choose any commercial activity that's out there and just play. It's also based on learning principles. If you want to know what, go back to our first session that I'll show you later on in our Think Smart series. We went through all the principles there, and it's integrated. So whereas this one only focused on cognitive skills, an evidence-based program would do application as well. So you would do the cognitive development, and then you would do an element that applies that knowledge to curriculum tasks such as reading, spelling, comprehension, and mathematics. And then only can you expect to see the differences. Whereas they had a single cognitive focus, an evidence program would be based on mutualism. So it would acknowledge that if you're going to develop those cognitive skills, you need to develop a set of cognitive skills because there's an interplay between them. So you're going to do multisensory work, you're going to combine various cognitive skills in one lesson. And then, whereas these were online only, again, a good program would not be computerized only. So you're going to maybe have a little bit of that, but you're also going to have hands-on tutor-led activities. Okay. So you can see the difference in thinking. So if you had a study on something like that, would you still just dismiss cognitive development as over-promising and under-delivering? Okay, so let's look at the meta-analysis by Kearns. So they analyzed 50 studies, which they considered, and I'm using the word considered, cognitive development. Now, here they included, and I'm going to just use one section. They have different categories. I can't use all of them, so I'm going to just look at the one category, the one for visual processing. And here they included interventions such as color reading overlays, which is a strategy. It's not cognitive development. It's a strategy that might or might not help a learner to see words clearer, but it does not develop your cognitive skills. Then they have these occluded lenses. Basically what it means, occluded lenses, is that they have found that dyslexic learners often struggled to see clearly. What they try to do is they would patch up the left eye so that they can only see out of their right eye. So they basically delete one eye. Now, again, that's a strategy to see maybe if we just look through the one eye, can we see clearer? It is not a development of any cognitive skill. And then they use eye tracking devices, like, for example, even like a reading ruler. So, but again, that's a strategy. It does not develop any cognitive skills. So they included a lot of these activities that really are nothing to do with cognitive skills. And then they concluded that that cognitive development doesn't work, and that it just really doesn't make sense to even pursue the field of cognitive development. So these two studies were key in dismissing development of cognitive training, and neither of the studies really debunked true cognitive training. All they did was they misunderstood or misrepresented it. So what happened is that most companies that may have considered developing cognitive training programs didn't do it. It was dead. And it's a real shame. Okay, so my closing thought is, with the Delphi study defining dyslexia as a set of processing difficulties, and then identifying cognitive deficits as the root, isn't it time to really put cognitive development back in the frame? For researchers, for people to consider that we really need to look at how to address all the different elements of dyslexia. And maybe we should then go and prioritize development over compensation, say that if it's possible for all learners to overcome or many of the symptoms of dyslexia and become functionally literate, that maybe that's some time that we do that. Okay, so I just want to play you a short video, and this is of an Edublox client in America, so it's not a South African based, but just listen to her story.
My son says that he wished he found Edublox sooner. And I never thought he would say something like that for an educational program. My son Cristiano was the first child that I'd ever homeschooled. When we started to learn to read, it seemed a little bit slow. We started to notice over time there's increasing frustration. He would get so frustrated that he would throw his books. I remember saying that I would never read a book again. We ended up getting him a neuropsych evaluation, and they told us that he had severe dyslexia. They basically told us that he's not really going to make a. They said they don't do tutors. It's not going to help. You're throwing your money in the garbage. I kind of just accepted that for like a month or so, and then I started doing some reading online, and I happened to stumble across Edublox. And then we had met with Susan. She was not concerned at all, and that was a different take from what we've been hearing. She's like, oh yeah, he'll learn how to read, no problem. So to find something like Edublox that actually worked in a relatively short period of time, I mean, 6 months sounds like a long time, but when you've been doing this for 6 years and it's been an immense struggle, that is, it's mind blowing. It's just, like, I can't describe how impactful it has been for us. That Edublox has helped him so much, and we're just very, very grateful and thankful for how it has helped him. You know, you hope, you always hope, right? You hope that something's going to get better. You hope that, you know, your kid can get help. But, you know, until you actually see it, it's like hard to believe because you already did so much yourself to try to help your child, and everyone else says that it's not going to work. He's starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. He was a little bit resistant at first when we first started, and I kind of expected that. But over time, he's starting to see the changes, and he is starting to get more encouraged by that and have a little bit more confidence in what he's able to do. But prior to that, yeah, there was a lot of frustration from him, and there was a lot of conflict at home between him and I, or my husband and him.
When we started Edublox, I didn't believe it at first, but now it's helped me, and I like reading so much. Like in my spare time, I pick up this book called Dog Man, and I read for like an hour to half an hour, and it's really helped me.
When it's not school time, when we talk about it, he talks about how much Edublox has impacted him, how much it's helped him.
I can do more stuff on my own than I could when we weren't doing Edublox, and it makes learning more enjoyable. If you don't like reading, definitely try Edublox because it'll change your life.
Okay, guys, what I'm trying to do is not to buy you into Edublox, but buy you into the concept of cognitive training and help us spread the word and get people to start thinking about it. Break down those myths that Edublox, that dyslexia is just about literacy. And that's the only way to help it is by developing your phonics skills, because it's just not true. Give that hope to the families and learners across South Africa, because the more people we can help, the better, of course, because we're changing lives. So October is International Dyslexia Month, and we at Edublox it's trying to do that, which we're trying to raise awareness. We've got a main sponsor, a Drive, who is giving us some prizes for competitions, which we'll look at the next page. But also we've done some reels about dyslexia facts and myths, and done some interviews that we're going to play for people to see the myths and to basically demystify them. And then we also have, of course, our strategic partners, which is Twinkle itself, and then the Lynette Beer Group, and we did some Oppibank interviews. This is Afrikaans, so if there's a viewer that are Afrikaans, you can go and view that on her site. And then we're also putting together this digital dyslexia resource booklet with some expert tips and videos and articles, which Edublox and Twinkle and Drive and the Lynette Beer Group will be distributing. So together we're trying to get the word out that dyslexia is about more than just literacy, and that we can have brighter futures if we think wider. Okay, so I just wanted to show you this one. This is one of the Oppibank conversations with the Lynette Beer, and this is a learner that is showing the longevity. I think one of the criticisms of cognitive training is that the result is only short term, and then the learners just fall back and they struggle again. And this young lady did a conversation with Lynette Beer, Sansha for Yun. She was diagnosed as dyslexic, and she was told by her teacher that she would never achieve anything and that she would never be able to go to university. She did Edublox for 3/4 years, and she did cognitive development as well as together the application and reading and spelling development. And after her global IQ increased by 14 points, and in matric she was in the top 20 in her school, with no concessions, no academic accommodations, just working independently like any other learner. And she went on, and she said that in the interview that she went on now to study teaching because she wants to give hope to learners, and she wants to tell them and tell other teachers that there are hope, and want to be the opposite from the teacher that she had. And so she's a second-year student in teaching, and last year in 2024, she passed her first year with a 71.7% average, which I think for someone that's been told they will never be able to do it, I think she's proven them wrong. So if you're interested, there's some competitions going on in Dyslexia Month. So you've got the Page to Performance, which is the individual one, where learners can submit a 1-minute dramatic reading video. The entries must be tagged to the Edublox pages, so your local Edublox or the national Edublox, and there's weekly 500 Rand book voucher prizes. And then the Read Together, Shine Together, which is a group reading. I don't know if you've seen this hype with getting big groups to read, and we're going to do that as well. So try and get the biggest group reading event in South Africa or Namibia, and submit your group reading video, which is 1 to 2 minutes, with your group's details about the group size, the date, and the location, and try to be creative, think of fun locations and signs and themes, and then try to sponsoring some prizes for first, second, and third place. Post your videos then on social media. I think the information has been sent to schools, but if your school hasn't received it, then you're also welcome to let them know about it. Okay, so, and as normal, if you have learners and if you're more interested to go and see what the cognitive assessment might look like, this is a free online screening tool where you can register learners, or register yourself even, and go and test it and see what it looks like. Carl will also distribute the link. Okay, and then if there's any questions.